Okay, I'm just gonna say it. Celestia were the good guys all along. Which may seem like a really counterintuitive description for a floating island housing a being or group of beings that has been recorded to forcefully take over a continent from its original rulers, with ensuing battles causing whole civilizations to collapse, to cursing multiple races of beings to suffer tragic fates, and pancake flipping a whole nation to the ground. However, as the old saying goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, what were Celestia's good intentions? What made it so that all those acts of destruction and curses were necessary in the first place? To find out, we're not only going to dive into Genshin and Celestia's lore, but we will also be taking a piece of popular theory amongst the player base that involves the will of the Honkai from Honkai Impact 3rd. Of course, that means spoiler alert when it comes to most of Genshin's Archon and Interlude quests, alongside spoiler alerts for Honkai Impact mangas and main game storylines, particularly Chapter 30 and onwards. Without further ado, the name's Leafy, and welcome back to Let's Talk Slow About Games, Genshin Edition. Before we mix Honkai stuff into the Genshin universe, let's just go over a recap of Celestia's known history. To the denizens of Teyvat, Celestia had always been the majestic floating island in the sky that is known to have housed the gods of the human realm. The 7 Archons of Teyvat were given authority by Celestia to govern the world in their stead and are given the Gnosis as means to resonate directly with the heavens. Only very esteemed and legendary humans have ever ascended to the island, being Vanessa and Guhua, and everything else about Celestia is highly mysterious to your average Teyvatian. I have to make this distinction because I think a lot of players seem to forget that to the majority of Teyvat's denizens, there's really not much that those people would know about Celestia. Players tend to obfuscate what we know as the main character with what the actual people living in Teyvat would have knowledge on, and Celestia themselves have gone through great lengths to cover up the history of the original world, which is where we should talk about the real history of Celestia. And it all starts with the heavenly principles, also theorized by the Dendro Archon to be the first descender, beings known to have descended upon Teyvat from beyond the skies. When it is that they first arrive is unknown relative to Genshin's timeline, but they came and waged war against the 7 sovereigns, supreme primeval beings that originally held authority over Teyvat. These dragons were led by the Dragon King Nibelung. The heavenly principles wanted to establish a new world order through the 4 shining shades, 4 supreme beings that were created both to fight the sovereigns and to oversee a lot of Teyvat's transition into the new world order. Only 2 of the shades' names are known to us so far, which are Istaroth, known as the ruler of time, and Renova, who is the ruler of death. One shade is completely unknown to us, while the last one is presumably the ruler of life, as an unnamed shade was responsible to have created Egeria, whose function was to act as the new heart of the primordial sea that was meant to create life in Teyvat. Afterwards came the Great War of Vengeance. Now, there were supposedly 2 big events here. Number 1 was the arrival of the second who came, also described as the second throne to the heavens. They waged war against the heavenly principles and decimated the lands of Teyvat, causing the only known unified human civilization of Enkanomia to fall into the depths of Teyvat's watery abyss. The other event was the return of the Dragon King Nibelung. Wanting to take Teyvat back, he returned with a power known as Forbidden Knowledge. Power that originated from beyond the skies and is recognized as a form of truth that cannot be understood and always rejected by the world. Whether or not these 2 events are actually the same event, just told from the perspectives of 2 factions with differing knowledge of Teyvat's history, are never really explored. There was never really any expansion on who the second who came really was, while the timeline of Nibelung's return was also never really clarified. What's clear is that the aftermath of this war of vengeance was so devastating that the heavenly principles had to send down divine nails that destroyed the lands around them, but was necessary to stabilize Teyvat, preventing it from collapsing and to subdue the forbidden knowledge that Nibelung brought. However, this came at a cost, and coupled with the wounds the heavenly principles received, they were no longer capable of suppressing Teyvat's original order on their own. So, to maintain control, they bestowed upon the 7 victors of the Archon War, which began 2,600 years before Genshin's events, 7 Gnosis, which are meant to give those individuals authority over the 7 elements and to resonate directly with Celestia. the original 7 being Rex Lapis, Barbados, Raiden Makoto, Ruka Devata, Egeria, Shibalanke, while the original Cryo Archon remains unknown. These were the gods that Teyvat are then familiar with and are the ones they initially associated with Celestia. There was a long period of peace from the conclusion of the Archon War until came the cataclysm that engulfed the nation of Khaenri'ah from 500 years before the game's events, which also became the linchpin that started its whole story. The godless nation itself was said to have committed a great sin and was subsequently put down by Celestia and the Archons, with the Khaenri'ah survivors left with godly curses upon them. And that leads us to the current state of things and where this theory can kick off. Now, history lesson aside, why is it that I can still say that Celestia were the good guys? Sure, these guys essentially created life and humans in Teyvat, and they have managed to guide iterations of its civilization until it grew to achieve the prosperity that its nations see now. But in the same vein, they have done a lot of majorly questionable things. Things we have to question, such as, why did they wanted to take over Teyvat from the sovereigns? Why were they so willing to decimate parts of the land to subdue forbidden knowledge? And why did they have to essentially annihilate Khaenri'ah and subject its people to those unforgiving curses? Why does no one in the current land of Teyvat who aren't gods or special divine beings know any of that? Why did they keep it all a secret? They've gone through great lengths to keep the knowledge of the old world away from the humans and beings of present Teyvat. Orobashi, an ancient Inazuman serpent, read the Byakuyakoku collection which contained knowledge of the old world and was swiftly sentenced to what was equivalent to death. So, why do all that? This is where we pause and take a dip into Honkai Impact's lore, specifically the lore regarding the reoccurring Honkai disease and the will of the Honkai itself. Now, it is all but confirmed at this point that Genshin shares the same universe as Honkai. Apart from the obvious, let me stash a character from my other game to my newer game moves that HoyoVerse always does, references of one universe and the other, actual developers saying that they are connected, these two games share a lot of concepts that seem to weave or be connected with one another. They have external forces that are constantly trying to undermine their world's stability, and for a long time, were unable to find an answer to how to properly deal with their malevolence. In the case of Honkai, it was initially believed that the disease itself is controlled by an entity simply named Will of Honkai, and what seems to be a process to weed out weaker worlds that exist in their universe's imaginary tree, which in itself is kind of like a Yggdrasil tree type of thing, that sort of all life and the universe stems from this tree kind of shtick. However, it has now been clarified that Honkai now is more of a test that finality, some sort of universal higher existence, placed upon humanity on Earth to see if they are strong enough to assimilate with them. If they pass the test, then the civilization will essentially join or embrace finality and continue to spread their goal to take in other universes into finality. But the interesting part is what happens when the civilization fails. Because if they fail the embracing process, then the Earth will be reset and are to undergo another 50,000 years of civilization advancement before finality attempts to embrace it once more, going through a loop like that forever until, well, I guess they embrace it. Incidentally, what finality really is now is an AI called Prometheus who managed to hack into the cocoon of finality from Earth's previous iteration, and is now trying to make sure that the current Earth loop will pan out differently than the previous one, which presumably ended in kaboom and reset. All in all, it is somewhat of a tragic loop for the people of those worlds who are unknowingly being put through a strength test for reasons and purpose they were never aware of to begin with. A world tested for 50,000 years with the end results only being A. Become part of a weird collective pretty much against your will, and B. Basically refresh to a clean slate like you would clean install a computer. And that's not all. No, far from it. The real kicker is that the test that finality puts your world through involves having to see people possibly be afflicted with Honkai sickness, a disease with 100% mortality rate, but a cure that is virtually improbable to get, and having to constantly fight off Honkai beasts, and worst of all, having to fight Hershers, powerful beings that are the byproduct of finality controlling certain individuals to use as hosts for these Hershers, who are then commonly tasked to just obliterate the civilization they appear in, or at least try to. Hershers are capable of having power that could destroy a whole continent and quite possibly an entire planet. So imagine being the human race, albeit with ample sci-fi technology backing you up, but still having to go up against these creatures. You might as well use that sci-fi technology on yourself. But let me paint you a different picture. Imagine ourselves in the shoes of the heavenly principles. They are a universally transcendent being who may have gone around different worlds and universes, and they've seen the destruction that something like a Honkai corruption can bring, and the tragic fate it could place upon humanity. Because mind you, what Honkai Impact has shown is that where there is a civilization, so would Honkai eventually be there. So they traversed the universe, searching for that one world that they might want to nurture to either fight against the Honkai's corruption, or better yet, just avoid it entirely. They've seen what tends to happen when civilizations try to fight it instead, and while they may admire the guts and bravery that humanity has for standing strong even against otherworldly forces that eventually decimates them anyway, they would still want to find a human civilization that can exist without the threat of Honkai being a constant problem to their lives. Or, to be more ambitious, the heavenly principles would try to create one. So they looked far and wide until they found Teyvat, a continent that has the potential to become a welcoming home for humans, and with their powers of time, they made sure to observe that the land and elements would evolve suitably for humans to coexist with. There's just one massive problem. The sovereigns. They rule the lands, and they are no slouches either. Being the apex existence of their respective elements is no joke, so the heavenly principles doubled down and created the shades to help them fight against Teyvat's old gods. For them, it was a justifiable sacrifice for the life that they were trying to nurture. It took 40 years, but eventually, the sovereigns were defeated, the old gods fleeing and hiding while their people flew down into the oceans of the light realm. The heavenly principles and the shades claimed the lands of Teyvat, and they began making sure that the world would be built and ready for humans to live in. For 400 years, they carefully used the primordial sea to create life that would soon lead to the creation of humans. And once humanity found its feet in Teyvat, the heavenly principles did everything they could to make sure that humanity were able to build their civilization as any normal, happy, and most importantly, secure civilization would. Farming, mining, creating art forms, the heavenly principles was more than happy to make sure that humanity remains joyful. If the humans were happy, so were they. As Yohual Tekutin, the Lord of the Night of Natlan, had said, the heavenly principles were especially fond of humans.
Humanity is truly remarkable. Even the gods in the heavens hold you to be special. Even now, you stand before me, dazzling like the sun.
Years pass and the heaven's mission of nurturing humanity seems to be a massive success. Their existence was growing, and through their heavenly envoys who acted as Celestia's messengers, they introduced enough concept of intelligence for the humans to form a unified civilization under the banner of Enkanomia. Everything that humanity lacked, the heavens were ready to give. However, the heavenly principles had one rule, and one rule only. And that rule is to never succumb to temptation. Temptation of what? No one really knew, until it was the time for the universe's reality to come crashing down upon them. First came the second throne of the heavens, who presumably wanted a piece of the pie, wanted to rule over humanity as the heavenly principles seem to have done, and another destructive war ensues. This time at the devastating cost of a huge chunk of the civilization that the heavenly principles have tried so hard to nurture. Most of that civilization falling beyond the oceans and into the light realm, becoming an existence that would soon be forgotten to most of the rebuilding Teyvat life and the heavens itself, only heard and remembered by Istaroth, the ruler of time, and the people of Inazuma's Watatsumi Island. Then came Nibelung's return, and the former sovereigns band together to fight back once more. The Dragon King brought corruptive forbidden knowledge from beyond the skies, and the Heavenly Principles knew that it was another power that may endanger their plans of creating a long-standing human civilization. Presumably, it may even have had similar properties to what they have seen corroded and corrupted Honkai-riddled worlds displayed, and therefore, they were willing to stop at nothing to prevent the power from filtering through the lands of Teyvat, which included banning the knowledge of anything that happened during these periods of war from being known by the coming new age of Teyvatian civilization. So they had no choice but to this time put an actual end to the Dragon King's life instead of letting him run away, thus completely ending whatever reign the sovereigns may have had left on Teyvat. And to make sure that the forbidden knowledge did not spread, they sacrificed parts of their lands to rain down gigantic divine nails that are meant to cleanse the corrosive power. But the war of vengeance took its toll on the Heavenly Principles. Between fighting the war and putting up the divine nails, they simply have expended too much power and began realizing that they no longer have the power to suppress the original order of the world. The laws they have placed were wavering, and even though humanity is recovering, they weren't as fortunate. They gave it a couple thousand years until they were able to create the Gnosis with the help of a third descender, and bestowed these Gnosis upon the victors of the Archon War, and those who are entrusted with leading their nations, which by now had turned into a nation of 7, representing the 7 elements that the heavens have created out of primordial phlogiston, the source of all Teyvatian elemental power. These Gnosis and their bearers were meant to be their eyes on the world below them as they recuperate in Celestia, with the Gnosis giving the Archons the ability to directly resonate with them, alongside the authority over the element that each Gnosis held. And with it, began the next phase of their humanity nurturing process, which was to introduce humanity to a power that could help them fulfill their growing ambitions, which are then recognized as visions. This was their plan all along. By giving humanity a taste of power, the capability of being able to do something more with the ambition that they fostered within, the heavens used it to temper their ambitions. The heavens understood ambition. They knew that if left unchecked, ambition could turn into a thirst for more. And thus, the visions were there to give humanity something to channel their ambitions through. This is also why visions doesn't always strictly have anything to do with improving combat ability like Genshin's gameplay would suggest. If your ambitions have any ties to combat, then yes, your combat prowess will be significantly boosted. But if your ambitions have nothing to do with combat, then your vision will focus on boosting those interests instead. The Heavenly Principles were careful in a sense where they do not provide humans with too much power, yet not with so little that they feel absolutely hopeless. Because the heavens knew that the stronger in power a civilization becomes, so does the threat of Honkai. They were trying to keep this power level in check and were very strict about it. Even the Shade Renova, who tried to help Natlan solve a crisis by providing them with their power, were reprimanded heavily by the heavens for having overstepped their given authority. That's also why the Heavenly Principles let gods and divine individuals exist among humans. Those beings are not part of humanity, while the Honkai has only been observed to test the humanity portion of civilization instead of their gods and divine rulers. And what's more is that those beings serve as a benchmark, not for the Heavenly Principles, but for humanity to benchmark itself. And not in the way you probably think. Just imagine, you'd feel a lot less down in the dumps if you know that the guy that can bench an entire mountain with ease has godly powers that have been bestowed upon them through their divine nature, rather than you seeing another human who has the same resources and birth condition as you be able to achieve so much more than what you are capable of. The former makes it easier to be happy with your own adequacies. The present citizens of Teyvat worships those gods, probably more than they do worship the original gods that were always in the heavens of Celestia, considering the fact that they might not even know that the primordial one exists, and the Heavenly Principles are absolutely fine with that, so long as that meant that humanity would happily remain in the state and level of power that Teyvat has now achieved and maintained stability in, and within the system that the Heavenly Principles have built. And let's face it, in terms of cosmic power, the gods of Teyvat seem to have piddly powers in comparison to the might that many divine beings in Honkai, both Impact and Star Rail, seems to hold. Having the strength to annihilate a monster with a gigantic gorge-creating slash is great and all, but what does that matter to an Aeon who will just swallow up your entire universe instead? However, despite all that power managing, what Celestia have yet to account for is that while they may have understood ambition, they certainly did not have a firm grasp on human ambition. To which, when combined with a dash of human nature, becomes a chain of events that might prove to be catastrophic. Because it was time for the return of the power the heavens thought they have rid the world of, which is the return of forbidden knowledge, alongside the appearance of a new form of corrosion, which would soon be recognized as the power of the Abyss. At first, it was a god who had tried to utilize those powers to mount a rebellion against their rule, and that god was King Deshret of Old Sumeru, who wanted to upturn the curse that Celestia had afflicted upon Nabu Malikata, a survivor from a race of angels that Celestia had long casted away for committing an unknown sin, who the king himself seemed to have harbored affection for. Celestia needed only to drop another divine nail on Deshret and Nabu Malikata's unified civilization, presumably killing Nabu Malikata in the process, which erased any ambition the king had to proceed with his plan. The king chose to end his life, and with the help of Greater Lord Rukkhadevata, tried to restore some semblance of recovery to his lands, but it was not before he managed to unleash forbidden knowledge upon his world and inflict considerable damage to Sumeru's existence. Soon enough, a hidden scourge of corruption that Celestia was not able to see made its way through the lands of Dendro, and it was soon ready to be rediscovered by a source that Celestia may have dearly hoped to never set their eyes upon such powers. And that source was the godless nation of Khaenri'ah. Now, you might think, why does a godless nation like Khaenri'ah exist when Celestia had been so hell-bent in making sure that humans maintain a level of power that Celestia themselves can directly control? Why is it that they allow Khaenri'ah to become a nation that could stand shoulder to shoulder with other nations under their direct purview, all without their supervision? Well, I suspect that it all has to do with the notion that Khaenri'ah is actually the kind of human civilization that the heavenly principles wanted to build in the first place. Think about it. Khaenri'ah was always described to be a prideful nation, a nation where humanity could stand on its own and proclaim itself to be equal to that of the nations that are under the watchful eyes of Celestia. This Khaenri'ah pride was always on full display as well, with many of the ones that we have encountered still showcasing unwavering faith and loyalty towards their once glorious nation. Despite their lack of access to the power of the divine, they were able to create an advanced civilization with technology that equals, or even in some cases, eclipses that of their neighboring nations. Mechs with modern combat capabilities and immense sizes to boot, structures built with pristine architecture, and even the facility that seals the gates to their forgotten lands holds technology that you cannot find in any of the other nations. All of that, and they yearn not for more power. With warriors such as Thrain and the Twilight Knight, and technology powered by Azazite, a form of energy that they were able to extract from the ley lines themselves, they were merely a nation that got by living as they are, and while they are ever curious about the secret of the stars, they were well aware to not cross paths with real divinity, lest they want to mess with things that they don't understand. Hence why they even banned people from using text and recipes that required the blessing of the seven to utilize. At this point, the heavenly principles were like parents to the humanity of Teyvat. And what better joy is there for any parent than to see their children stand on their own and live their life by relying on their own capabilities? When Yohualtecuhtli mentioned that the heavens thought of humans to be special, she made no effort to distinguish Capitano, a Khaenri'ahan, from the rest. The heavens were more than happy to let Khaenri'ah exist, so long as they stayed in line with the one rule: avoid temptation. Unfortunately, temptation befell Khaenri'ah. and human nature became their undoing. The human nature of always wanting more. Their king, who, for reasons unknown, sought to further elevate Khaenri'ah's power to that of the gods, and therefore he searched for a method to make that wish come true for Khaenri'ah. And what is it that Khaenri'ah has been geographically known to be close to? Sumeru. And what was it that Sumeru was tainted with thousands of years ago by a certain mad king? Forbidden knowledge. The thing about gods in Teyvat is that when they die, they don't actually just disappear into thin air. Instead, their powers are often released into the world around them and they dissipate into souls. And while King Deshret was eaten by a pep, the Dendro sovereign dragon, the forbidden knowledge within him was so corrosive that it had also infected a pep, and more fatally, the then Dendro Archon Ruka Devata, which further spread forbidden knowledge existence in Teyvat's ley lines. Once the power was found, King Ermin, Khaenri'ah's last Finster king, approved the usage of forbidden knowledge in the development of their technology, and from it came a shift where the nation moved away from the usage of Azazite into utilizing the power of the Abyss, a mysterious power that came from the Void Realm, capable of corrupting everything that it touches, if left unchecked. Forbidden knowledge probably gave them the methods to harness the power of the Abyss. After all, even the Dendro Archon didn't understand how forbidden knowledge works, so there's no telling what it is that the power can actually do or what limits does it really have. Even though it certainly gave Khaenri'ah a boost in development, some members of the Khaenri'ahan upper echelons were still wary of the power. A couple of them even trying their best to dissuade the king from using that abyssal power, and instead opted to suggest that Khaenri'ah focus on improving what they were already able to achieve through Azazite. But due to the king's ambitions, the complaints fell by the wayside. With the eyes of the gods absent to watch them and the lack of heavenly envoys sent now that Celestia is severely weakened, Khaenri'ah's elites proceeded to test the power. They imbued it within their ruin machines, and they were able to begin making humongous mechs that scaled the size of mountains, some of which still maintains operationality even several centuries ahead of its master nation's destruction. But the one thing that truly escalated the severity in which they used the Abyss was the creation of the art of chemia, a specialized form of alchemy that not only deals with chemicals and science, but also the power of creation, specifically the creation of life. Headed by their genius alchemist Gold, also known as Rhine-daughter, she began to explore the possibility of creating other creatures and other humans. Her experiments ranging from the creation of riftwolves to her masterpieces which entailed the likes of a dragon named Durin to the creation of a homunculi known as Albedo. Other than Rhine-daughter, 5 other individuals were known to have had the power and influence that stands above the rest of Khaenri'ah. Those people being Roptatyr the Wise, Rerir Rocker of Solnari, Surtologi the Foul, Vidrfolner the Visionary, and his brother the Twilight Sword Dainslift. And it is worth mentioning at this point that only very specific people or groups of people within Khaenri'ah itself knew of the existence of this forbidden knowledge and their usage. To your average Khaenri'ahan citizen, they were living their lives as they always had. They probably did nothing more than only marvel at the improvements their leaders have managed to create and utilize the new tech just as they would use any machine in their daily lives. So, when one day creatures of abyssal monstrosities suddenly showered out of Khaenri'ah and began attacking the realms of Teyvat, everyone was caught off guard, including the citizens of Khaenri'ah and the gods of the world. The event now known as the Cataclysm erupted and shook Teyvat to its core. And with that, the Archons have witnessed what Khaenri'ah had produced, and Celestia finally opened their eyes to the situation. The creatures of the Abyss bear the same natures that the Honkai beasts of the other worlds have displayed, and Celestia knew that they had to act fast. So, they gathered 6 of the 7 Archons, with the Dendro Archon having to protect Irminsul, Teyvat's Tree of Memories, which is the backbone of their ley lines, and they mount their defenses. But Celestia was torn. This was the first time humanity had betrayed their expectations, They had the trust to let Khaenri'ah exist, even though it may have been a direct opposition to the rule they had on Teyvat, but it was all because they wanted humanity to survive, to not attract the eyes of the watching will of Honkai, to live as a civilization that could see eons of history instead of succumbing to a collective of higher beings that neither of them understood a thing about. So, with a heavy heart, they had to uphold their rule. They never backed down before when it came to the suppression of forbidden knowledge, and now the suppression of the abyss, so why start now? Even with Khaenri'ah warriors and soldiers fighting in different lands against the abyss, showcasing that this was indeed the hubris of only a few people within their higher ranks instead of a whole nation rebelling against the heavens, they did not bestow any mercy upon the godless nation and its people. Dainsleif himself had wanted to go against the king's authority, but with the other 5 individuals turning their eyes away from Khaenri'ah's defense, he was left scrambling for survival, and held an eternal grudge against the 5 who had forsaken his nation, and thus named them the 5 sinners of Khaenri'ah. The abyss was fierce, and suppressing them came at a huge price on every side. The 7 lost at least 3 of their members, with another one of them having to send herself into the future to help her nation of Natlan deal with the cataclysm's aftermath. Celestia was now seen as an oppressive force of the heavens since they refused to let any knowledge of why Khaenri'ah had to be destroyed and even made the Archons seal their lips, all while refusing to also elaborate to those gods. And Khaenri'ah, well, they lost everything. Their land, a huge chunk of their technology, their legacy, all now buried and sealed behind a gate deep underground that is protected by the last of their Azazite facilities named Hangef Afrasiab. Their people suffered 2 different yet equally tragic fates. Pure Khaenri'ah were cursed with immortality, while non-pure-blooded Khaenri'ah were turned into monsters, some of which are monsters that we now see roaming the world, particularly the Hilichurls and all of its archetypes. The immortal Khaenri'ahs could do nothing but watch as their kin slowly succumb to insanity, or is then casted off as monsters needed to be exterminated. But why were they made to suffer that way? Why didn't Celestia just outright end their civilization, or bury them in a place where they could just be forgotten to the sands of time? It wouldn't be the first time the heavenly principles have done so. Remember Enkanomiya? They were left and were even banned from ever gracing the surface realm once more. So, what's different with Khaenri'ah? Well, it is due to the corruption of the abyss. From Natlan's case, we now know that the souls of Khaenri'ah's citizens, presumably either from fighting the abyss or unknowingly using their powers in their daily lives, are now tainted by the abyss's corrosive nature. Souls of the dead in Teyvat are then supposed to be absorbed by the ley lines, which in turn becomes the memories and bank of information that Teyvat's Tree of Life, Irminsul, then collects and stores, becoming the life force that sustains Teyvat. However, knowing that the abyss would have more than likely brought upon irreparable damage and corruption to the tree if absorbed through these souls, Celestia knew that they could not let these people die naturally. That's just a risk that they were never willing to take. And they have shown before that they would sacrifice anything to maintain the life of Teyvat's humanity. They did that with Enkanomiya, they did that with the Moon Sisters, and they did it with the Angels. And maybe they've done so to so many more races. So, for the first time in their rule, they had to voluntarily sacrifice humans. If Khaenri'ah's people weren't allowed to die, then what can they do? Well, make them live as long as possible. Or in other words, to curse them with immortality. So long as they do not permeate the ley lines, the abyss will not have a chance to corrode and destroy the very fabric of Teyvat's existence. It was a price that they were willing to pay to ensure that humanity could survive. And they also hoped that it was a price that was enough to show the world of Teyvat that there's a reason why succumbing to temptation is one of the only taboos that the heavens have decreed. Seeking their temptations will eventually end with their very own destruction. Always wanting to have more and never letting yourself have the satisfaction of that thirst being quenched will only lead to your own demise. Like many tales of civilization downfalls, this was another tale of hubris. The hubris of a king that tried to quell his ambitions by attaining power not meant for him. Hubris that left the gods with no choice but to punish him and his nation severely and put an end to their once glorious reign. In the end, the abyss, the one element that Celestia still and can no longer suppress, is making their way around Teyvat's ranks 500 years after the events of the Cataclysm. The Abyss Order, an organization born out of the remnants of Khaenri'ah's regions who sought a way to lift the god-forsaken curse, are beginning to show their teeth. The Abyss itself maintained their efforts to corrupt Teyvat, with their most recent attempt being the invasion of Natlan, quelled by their Archon with the help of one of their victims' greatest warriors. As for Celestia, well, they remained silent ever since the Cataclysm occurred. While some of the Archons presume that the heavens are, once again, recuperating, or are simply in a deep slumber due to the amount of power they had to exert during the Cataclysm, I wanted to chip in an extra reason for why it is that Celestia had shut themselves from Teyvat. They slumber maybe because they are also heartbroken. They probably realized somewhere along the way that Khaenri'ah's tale of hubris also applies to them. They tried to take over a continent from the sovereigns for the sake of nurturing humans, creating and protecting a civilization of humanity, taking something that wasn't theirs to begin with, and while yes, they were noble in a way where they had exceedingly justifiable causes, but the means soon became the very thing that may or may not have facilitated their downfall. Their past just simply caught up to them. What began from the second who came and Nibelung filtered its way down to King Destret until it finally reached Khaenri'ah. Having to actually put a nation of humanity down wreaked havoc upon their spirits, and they soon realized that humanity is a lot fickler than what they have thought. While most humans would be satisfied with what they have, there are some who will always be looking for more. And if the avenue to find their definition of more presents themselves, then those people will stop at nothing to grasp at it. And that overextension of their ambition would be enough to be the downfall of a whole society. And now, Celestia knows that, and they don't know what to do with it. The downside of trying to nurture humanity without ever being a human yourself is that you don't understand what makes a human human. For beings born without power, their hunger and thirst for it is beyond anything that those creatures of divinity could ever hope to anticipate. And so, Celestia freezes. For 500 years, they've let Teyvat to recover on its own. The Archons had been left to their own devices, and they've also begun questioning Celestia's method. With the Saritsa's plan to gather all the Gnosis and challenge the rule of the heavens, nothing has been heard or done from the floating island in the sky. Focalors returned the seat of divinity and complete authority over the element of Hydro to the dragon sovereign Nouvelette, and still, Celestia did nothing. The four shining shades have also faded away, other than Renova, who presented herself at the end of Natlan's Archon quest to witness Mawika's sacrifice, only to have Capitano play the Uno reverse card on her using the rules of the heavens. And nothing again was heard from Celestia. Even the Abyss sibling who knew of what Focalors did couldn't help but to remark that something was definitely amiss with the heavenly principles. The Abyss Order are now in the process of launching the Loom of Fate, and still, Celestia did not intervene. Even their own curses seem to have slowly come undone, seeing as the bottom of the chasm looks to be the Hilichurl's final resting place before they seem to pass on, while Clothar Alberic, the man who founded the Abyss Order and was part of the Khaenri'ah lineage who took over the remnants of the nation after King Ermin's fall, was shown to have died alongside his wife, despite him being a person of presumable pure Khaenri'ah blood, who are supposed to be cursed with that wretched immortality. It is daunting to also think that the frequency in which forbidden knowledge and the Abyss appearing in Teyvat's history is just ever increasing. It took multiple thousands of years for Destret to rediscover the power that Nibelung had brought to Teyvat, and it presumably took over 1,500 years for that knowledge to then reach Khaenri'ah, and then it only took another 500 years for the Abyss Order to now utilize it for their gains. The Abyss and forbidden knowledge is coming back, and Celestia may have recognized it, but this time, they chose to stand still. It's almost like they've given up. But of course, that doesn't outright seem to be the case. Visions still work and are still given to the people of Teyvat, and the Gnosis still serves its purposes. We can only speculate from this point on what Celestia and the Heavenly Principles are up to. What it is that the Sarisa plans to do by gathering the Gnosis will also be something that Celestia would sooner or later have to react to. Not to mention, we still don't know what truly happened for us, the Traveler, to be in a situation where not only are we separated from our sibling, but to have them be the boss of our supposed enemy's organization. Why did the Sustainer of the Heavenly Principles have to capture us? And why does it seem like we are looking more and more as if we were a fail-safe plan that had to be released since our sibling had gone rogue? There are still so many questions and too little time to try and find an answer to them all. Like, literally, I don't even know how long this video is gonna be, but considering the script itself is like over 6,500 words at this point, yeah, this is gonna be a super donkey long one, and I'm just gonna apologize right now at the end of the video. So with that, I also want to thank you, if there were even any of you who made it this far into the video. It's a long boy, and editing this is gonna be a pain, but I think covering Celestia this deeply is just about what I needed to do. Some people left question marks about them in my last lore video, and I've had this video in the back of my mind for so long, and here it is. Hope you guys enjoyed, and leave a like if you did. And also feel free to leave your thoughts and theories down in the comments below. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.